Welcome to Chapter 2, Episode 3. In the previous two episodes, we were introduced to the research of Dr. Willoughby Britton, who studies the adverse effects of meditation at Brown University. We learned that these effects span a wide range, from re-experiencing past trauma, to anxiety and paranoia, to outright delusions and hallucinations. Most of the meditators who have sought out Britton's help had no idea that these distressing experiences were even a possibility. Today, we're going to ask why. Why are the adverse effects of meditation not more widely known? And when they are known, why are they seldom discussed? As with any issue worth talking about, there are many factors at play. But the simplest answer is that researchers just aren't asking about it. In Britton's words, we have a lot of positive data on meditation, but no one has been asking if there are any potential difficulties or adverse effects, and whether there are some practices that may be better or worse suited for some people over others. In a Vice article from 2018, Britton says that more than 3/4 of research studies on meditation fail to even ask about adverse experiences. And on the rare occasion that adverse experiences are addressed, they tend to get minimized. Dan Lawton, who we met in the previous episode, says that the book The Science of Meditation spends nearly 300 pages touting the benefits of the practice while devoting only 2 pages to its negative effects. Okay, but if no one's asking about it, why are they not asking about it? Some of them simply don't believe that meditation is the cause of these adverse effects. One of the authors of the book we just mentioned is a neuroscientist named Richard Davidson, and he's a frequent critic of Britton's claims. In his view, many people who have adverse effects had a pre-existing vulnerability that was exacerbated by their meditation practice. Davidson goes on to argue that such people are not meditating correctly, to put it simply and coarsely. Some might even say they're not meditating, that they think they're meditating, but they're not really meditating. Perhaps, although we learned in the previous 2 episodes that a majority of the participants in Britton's study were themselves meditation teachers, and that less than a third had any kind of psychiatric history. So why is it so hard for people like Davidson to acknowledge the possible downsides of meditation? As we've learned, the research done on meditation has focused overwhelmingly on its benefits. Davidson even says, there are literally hundreds of different kinds of meditation practices, and only a very small variety of which have been seriously studied scientifically and have been championed in Western popular culture. Now this brings up an interesting point. I wonder what types of meditation practice are championed by Western science and culture. As the saying goes, follow the money. For Britton, this widespread assumption that meditation exists only for stress reduction and labor productivity, because that's what Americans value, narrows the scope of the scientific lens. When the time comes to develop hypotheses around the effects of meditation, the only acceptable and fundable research questions are the ones that promise to deliver the answers we want to hear. Stress reduction and labor productivity? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What I'm hearing is that the research that gets funded is precisely that which serves the interests of the market. But could this really be true? Could Western culture's current obsession with mindfulness really be rooted in the promotion of capitalism? Is this why corporate America learned to embrace the coffee break because it was found to make workers more productive? With regard to coffee breaks, the answer is yes. With regard to our actual interest, Western culture's current obsession with mindfulness, we turn to Ron Purser and David Loy. In a 2013 piece for the Huffington Post called Beyond McMindfulness, the pair argues that mindfulness training has wide appeal because it has become a trendy method for subduing employee unrest, promoting a tacit acceptance of the status quo, and as an instrumental tool for keeping attention focused on institutional goals. They go on to urge caution about this arrangement, writing that the stripped-down, secularized technique that is palatable to the corporate world amounts to a Faustian bargain, as rather than awaken individuals and organizations from the unwholesome roots of greed, ill will, and delusion, it is usually being refashioned into a banal, therapeutic, self-help technique that can actually reinforce those roots. This sounds remarkably similar to something Cornel West said in a recent New Yorker interview that actually had nothing at all to do with mindfulness. When you think of the secular these days, you think of careerism, opportunism, hedonism, egoism, individualism, and the ways in which science seems to be driven by corporate greed. Now, many will no doubt take issue with West's claim, but it's important to point out that it's not a critique of science or even scientists. Rather, the critique is about which questions are being asked in the first place. This is the same point we heard Britton make earlier about meditation research, and it's also incredibly relevant to our previous discussion on the role of childhood trauma in psychosis, a relationship that is clearly established but severely under-researched. Case in point, here's an article from the journal Clinical Schizophrenia and Related Psychoses, which found that 19% of schizophrenia research looked into drug therapy, while the percentage devoted to the link between child abuse and psychosis was just 0.3%. That same article also featured a quote from the then president of the American Psychiatric Association, who said that, "If we are seen as mere pill pushers and employees of the pharmaceutical industry, our credibility as a profession is compromised. As we address these big pharma issues, we must examine the fact that as a profession, we have allowed the biopsychosocial model to become the bio-bio-bio model." Granted, the relationship between psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry is a special case, as outside of clinical trials, a majority of research funding comes from the federal government. At the same time, it's worth pointing out that the government has a vested interest in seeing capitalism succeed. Again, the issue is not one of scientific ethics so much as it is who decides what research deserves funding. And sadly, one cannot ignore the influence of special interests on such decisions, be it big oil and its distortion of climate science, to the NRA, who famously succeeded in cutting research funding into gun violence prevention by 90%. It's not fun to think about, but it's important to be aware of the factors at play, be they economic, social, or political, as we'll see in Chapter 3 when we discuss the early research into psychedelics. That's all for today. In the future, we'll revisit the issue of who decides what research gets funded and how this impacts science and society as a whole. Now, I mentioned the relationship between psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry, but there's a much bigger and way more interesting story that I can't wait to tell you about that has to do with government funding of what is arguably considered the most successful scientific theory ever. And as much as I really just want to tell you about that right now, we'll both have to be patient because we're not going to get around to it till about chapters 5 or 6. In the meantime, we're going to return to our roots in the next episode, where we'll take another look at the link between psychosis and spiritual awakening. On that note, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Upton Sinclair that does well to encapsulate today's discussion. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.